The memory of St. Ignatius is etched into my mind not in vivid color, but in shades of gray and crumbling stone. I was 8 years old, holding my grandmother's hand as we walked the overgrown path behind our house. The forest was a cathedral of silence that day, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. And there it was, emerging from the mist like a sleeping giant, the old church. Its stained glass windows were shattered eyes, and the oak door, banded with iron, hung slightly ajar. A low, resonant hum seemed to vibrate from the very stones, a sound you felt in your bones more than heard with your ears. My grandmother's grip tightened, her knuckles white. She didn't say a word, only pulled me gently but firmly away, her eyes fixed on that dark opening. She never explained, and I never asked, but sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the night, I can still feel that hum, a forgotten hymn calling from the woods. And sometimes, I swear I can still see the shadow that moved behind one of those broken windows, watching us leave. I never should have opened that door. The red light of the on-air signal glowed in the glass of control booth. A soft, electric hum filled the space between songs. It was that deep part of the night, the time when the world outside my window was just a blanket of black, empty streets. Sleeping houses and wide voice was the only thing keeping the silence at bay. I sipped my coffee. The tea was cold and bitter. I set the cup down on the console. The click of the ceramic echoed in the small room. That's when I heard it. A faint hiss beneath the usual quiet of the dead air. A whisper of static. I reached to cut IT. My finger hovered over the button. And then I heard the singing. It was a choir, distant, filtered through a layer of crackling interference, a hymn I didn't recognize. The melody was slowed. IT felt ancient. The voices were clear, though. Too clear for how much static there was. They weren't fuzzy or broken. They were pristine, perfect as if the singers were standing just on the other side of a thick wall. I put on my headphones. The world narrowed to the hiss in the song. The harmony was beautiful. IT made my chest feel tight. IT was a sound that didn't belong here. Not in my stereo studio. Not in this empty hour. The phone line on my console lit up without a single blinking red light. I almost didn't answer. Something in the air felt thin. I pressed a button. You're on the air. There was only breathing at first, a shallow, wet sound. Then a whisper, a woman's voice, stretched and thin. They're singing the song, she said. Her words were so soft, I felt them more than heard them. What song is that? I asked, my own voice a low murmur into the mic. A long pause. I could hear him weaving through the static behind her breath. The two sounds were beginning to blend. The song for the ones, she whispered, who are about to arrive. The line went dead. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I looked through the glass window of the booth, into the dark of the empty studio beyond. Nothing moved, just the steady glow of idle equipment. The static from the broadcast began to fade. The hiss receded like a tide pulling back. The hymn grew stronger, clearer. The voices lost their distant quality. They were no longer coming from the speakers. They were coming from a hallway, right outside my door. The air grew cold, breath misted in the pale light of the console. I couldn't move, and I could only listen. The choir was right there down on the other side of the thin wooden door. I could hear the individual voices now. The soft intake of breath before a phrase. The slight tremble in a high soprano. The low, resonant hum of the basses. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard, and it filled me with a dread so complete I felt frozen in my chair. The door handle didn't move, and no shadow crossed the gap at the bottom. They just stood there, singing their welcome. And then the static returned. It didn't come from the speakers. IT seemed to pour from the walls themselves, a rising, rushing wave of white noise. IT swallowed him. First the sopranos were gone, then the altos. The melody dissolved into crackle. The static swelled, a deafening roar in the silence of the night. And then it too vanished. The red on-air light still glowed. I sat there, the hands gripping the edge of the console. The only sound left was a soft, ragged breathing. It wasn't my own. It was coming through my headphones. Filling the silence I was meant to fill, a slow, wet, and endless breath. Waiting on the air, the cathedral rose before me, pale and immense, its stones slick with morning frost. The air smelled of damp earth and old rain, and the fog pressed softly against my boots. I had been hired to repair the gargoyles. All of them, or so they said. The edges of the carvings were worn, the stone cracked like tired skin. Even in daylight, some corners were swallowed by shadow. One alcove, tucked behind a carved arch, caught my eye. The stone there felt different. I touched it with the back of my hand. Warm, almost pliable, not like the rest. The grotesque face of the gargoyle seemed alive, its eyes carved wide, its mouth frozen in a scream that didn't echo. I tried to pull my hand back, but the warmth lingered, like it remembered me. Night came. I stayed late, alone with my tools in the hush of the cathedral. The moon slanted through the stained glass, cutting the floor into pale, jagged lines. A hum ran under my feet, low and steady. The stone beneath my palms throbbed. A heartbeat, slow, deep, persistent. I could not move. I dared not breathe. The shadows around the alcove shifted, just slightly, like something turning its head. By morning, the air had grown colder. Frost clung to my boots, to the edges of the gargoyles. But the one in the alcove had changed. Its mouth opened. A mist of warm breath drifted into the morning light. It lingered for a moment, then vanished, leaving only the smell of stone and iron. I packed my tools with trembling fingers. Every hammer, every chisel seemed suddenly heavy. I felt its eyes on my back. Cold stone, yet full of awareness. I did not look over my shoulder. I could not, but I felt it following my steps, layer by layer, until I reached the street. Even then, I thought I heard it behind me. Soft, careful steps that did not touch the ground. I hurried. The fog swallowed the cathedral behind me. And yet, sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I swear I feel it watching. Warm eyes from stone, waiting. I do not return. I do not speak of it. But when I close my eyes at night, I feel the thrum of a heartbeat beneath my palms. And I remember the warm stone that breathes. The church smelled of cold stone and dust. I had been told it was deconsecrated, empty, forgotten. But every night, the air felt heavier. Footsteps echoed soft in the nave as I walked between rows of cracked pews. Thin rays of moonlight seeped through broken stained glass, painting pale, fractured patterns on the floor. The dust shifted under my boots, tiny clouds rising and falling like hesitant breaths. The first night I noticed the footprints. I thought I was imagining it. Small, narrow impressions, pressed deep into the soft dust of the aisle. They led straight to the same pew, and always stopped there. I followed them the next morning. No one had been inside. No footprints but those. Curiosity turned to unease. I decided to wait. The choir loft offered a perfect vantage, high above the wooden benches. The air smelled faintly of mildew and cold smoke. I hid behind a railing, knees pressed to my chest, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The hours crept by. The church was silent. Not a creak, not a whisper, only the faint hum of my own heartbeat. At some point, the darkness seemed to pulse, like it was breathing slowly around me. And then, 3:03, I had been watching the main door, listening. It moved first, just a whisper against the stone floor. A creak, low and drawn out. The door swung open. A shadow spilled into the nave, tall and impossibly thin. It glided across the floor. No steps, no sound but the soft rustling of dust stirred in its wake. It paused at the pew. It settled there, perfectly still. I raised my flashlight, hand stiff. The beam cut across the aisle, but it did nothing. It didn't illuminate. It didn't cast a shadow. Instead, the darkness deepened around it. The edges of the light recoiled, curling back like smoke. I couldn't look away. The figure turned its head, slowly. The motion was deliberate, almost languid. And then it looked at me, not with eyes, not with anything I could name. I felt it, instead, a pressure, a knowing, an awareness that reached past the thin veil of my body, past my skin, into the small hidden corners of my mind. I tried to breathe. I tried to move. My body refused, frozen by the absence of eyes, by the weight of being seen by nothing at all. The shadows seemed to bend, twisting closer, yet the figure remained at the pew, unmoving. Time warped. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The faint rustle of the floorboards under my knees seemed deafening. Dust motes floated in the pale moonlight like tiny stars, suspended in a void. I could smell the faint iron tang of old blood, though no wound was near. Then the figure shifted slightly. A subtle lean forward, a tilt of the head. The presence grew colder, quieter, almost contemplative. I imagined it breathing, though I heard nothing. The temperature dropped around me. My flashlight flickered. The edges of the loft seemed to blur, as though the darkness itself were stretching toward me. And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the figure was gone. The pew was empty, the dust untouched, save for those footprints that led there every night. The air hung heavy, smelling faintly of wet stone and ash. I sank to the floor, knees pressed to chest, trying to hear my own heart beneath the hum of silence. I stayed there until dawn. The church returned to its usual quiet. Shadows flattened. The dust settled, but the footprints remained. I never saw it again, not in the days that followed, not in the nights I dared to linger. But sometimes I can still feel that gaze. When I close my eyes, when the world is quiet, when I am alone, it waits, always at the same pew, always at 3:03, silent, patient, and unseen. The fog hung low that evening. It wrapped the village in a damp, quiet gray. Even the cobblestones seemed to hold their breath. I had always avoided the chapel, not because it was old or cold or empty, but because the bell, it never rang. 50 years now, 50 silent winters. Children still dared each other to climb the belfry. I watched them from the lane, their small shadows stretching long in the pale light. One girl swore she saw the rope sway, just for a moment, as if it had a mind of its own. The villagers never spoke of it plainly, only murmurs, whispers, secrets pressed behind closed doors. I remember the old woman, hunched on her porch, her voice thin and trembling like dry leaves. "It doesn't ring for the living anymore," she said. Her eyes drifted to the chapel, pale as mist, only to call something home. That night the fog thickened. It crept through the streets, seeping into every doorway. I stood near my window, listening to the hush of the town, the soft rustling of trees, and then a single chime. It tore through the silence, loud, hollow, endless. I stumbled back from the glass. The walls seemed to shiver with it. It wasn't a sound meant to be heard. It was a warning, a thing moving beneath the fog. The night held its breath again. No footsteps followed, no shadows passed, just that faint, lingering hum in my chest. I pressed my palms to the cold window pane. The rope must have moved, I thought. But even in the darkness, I knew it hadn't been wind. Morning came pale, dripping with dew, and on the church steps, every dog in the village waited, silent, unblinking, patient, eyes dark, still, almost human in their watch. They didn't greet anyone. They didn't move. They just waited. I walked past them, keeping my voice low. A bark might have shattered something I wasn't meant to see. The old woman's words circled in my mind, heavy as the fog, only to call something home. The bell hung above, black and still, its surface gleaming faintly in the morning light. And I couldn't help but wonder what it answered, or what had come back. No one spoke of it. The children whispered less. Even the wind seemed cautious as it slid through the lanes. The silence settled around the chapel like dust, thick and patient. And sometimes when I pass by, I swear I hear it again. A single, hollow chime, stretching just past the edges of sleep, like the bell remembers, like it remembers all of us. The church was quiet. Sunlight spilled across the wooden pews, pooling in soft, golden rectangles. Dust motes floated in the light. I could hear my own breath, slow and careful, as I moved between the rows, camera in hand. The air smelled faintly of old wood and candle wax. Everything seemed empty. I started with the nave, capturing the arches and the patterns of light along the stone. The lens focused on the high windows, the faint cracks in plaster. A hush hung in the space, like the building itself was holding its breath. I knelt to photograph the altar. The polish wood gleamed. My reflection shimmered in the brass candlesticks. The images felt serene, even sacred. Back in the corner, I reviewed the first shots. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a pale blur near the edge of the frame. I frowned, adjusted the focus, clicked again, and there it was, a face soft and indistinct, just beyond the center of the pews. I held my breath. The light shifted outside. Shadows stretched across the stone floor. I took another photograph. The blur was closer now, closer to the lens, closer than it should be. I lowered the camera and looked. Nothing, just the empty pews, just the quiet. I shook my head. Missed, maybe, a trick of exposure. But each photo told a different story. I moved slowly, careful not to startle whatever it was. A step forward, click. Now the blur had features. Pale eyes, thin lips, closer. A faint smile curled at the edges. The smell of old paper and varnish filled my nose. I swallowed. My fingers trembled slightly. I tried to focus on the wood, the brass, anything familiar. But the camera kept showing me what my eyes could not see. Every frame, the figure moved nearer, its expression soft, almost expectant. I stepped back toward the altar. The air grew colder, though the sun still poured through the windows. The hum of silence pressed around me. I whispered my own name, but the sound felt strange, swallowed by the space. Click. The blur had shoulders now. Clothing, perhaps a dark coat. Click. The face was sharper. Eyes fixed on me. I lowered the camera. The pews were empty. A draft brushed my neck. I took another photo from the aisle, lens pointing toward the front. It wasn't a blur anymore. It was a man, pale, seated in the first row, smiling at something I could not understand. A hymn book lay closed in front of him. I blinked. The sunlight shifted. Nothing moved. Click. I took a final shot from the altar. Looking back, the man filled the frame now. His smile stretched across a face that seemed impossibly still, impossibly alive. The pews behind him glowed with dust and sunlight. And then I lowered the camera again. The pews were empty. The aisle stretched toward me, empty, silent. The hymn book was open. A single page flipped halfway, as if he had just risen. The smell of old paper pressed in closer. I reached out, trembling. The pages were cold. I could feel the faint indentation of fingertips in the dust. I stepped back, heartbeat echoing. A shadow shifted along the far wall. But when I turned fully, nothing. Just a light. Just the silence. Just the smell of varnish and dust. I gathered my camera, shaking, and backed toward the door. The sunlight seemed thinner here, paler, like it had been stretched over something unseen. I didn't dare look back. Not until I was outside. Even then, the church seemed to exhale behind me. I could still see his smile in the back of my mind, in every photograph, every frame, every blur turned human in my chest. I don't know if he was waiting, or if he had always been there, patiently, in the pews, in the light, in the pause between breaths. I haven't gone back, but the hymnal page, I remember it pale under my fingers, as if he had left a trace, a whisper, a proof that I was not alone. The church waited at the edge of the fog. Its stone walls were pale, soaked in shadow, hollow in the late afternoon light. I didn't know why I came, only that something had pulled me here. The door groaned when I pushed it open. Dust swirled in the beam of my flashlight, and the air smelled of wet wood and old stone. Somewhere, a loose shutter rattled in the wind. I moved through the nave. The pews were broken, splintered like dry bones. The silence pressed around me, thick, like it was holding its breath. I didn't look at the altar. I didn't need to. I was drawn to the confessional. It was dark, polished by years of hands and secrets. I slid the door open slowly. The smell inside was colder. A faint mold, faint iron. I sat. The darkness swallowed me. I wanted nothing but quiet. Then, your name? It wasn't a priest. Not a voice of calm or warmth. It was thin, reedy, like the wind sneaking through a cracked window. And it knew me. I froze. My stomach tightened. It said my name again, softer this time, dragging across the wood like slow fingernails. You remember what you did, it whispered. I didn't, or maybe I had tried to forget. The voice painted the memory for me, stroke by stroke. I was 10. It was summer. The lake, the sun, the way the water smelled when I let go of his hand. Every detail I had buried. It told me back, and I saw it all again, the way I had hoped no one ever would. You forgot nothing, it said, even what you buried beneath the floorboards. I shivered. The shadows in the booth trembled as if alive. A soft scratching. No, whispering, crawl from the other side. The voice didn't stop. It told me things I didn't know I had hidden from myself. Every small cruelty, every lie I had tucked into corners of my mind, spoken with patience, like a lover and a tormentor all at once. Your penance is to listen, it said. And I did. I couldn't do anything else. The wood of the booth pressed against my back. I could feel the grain, the smooth curve of the seat beneath my palms. Every breath I took sounded loud. Every heartbeat shook the quiet. It began naming other things, secrets that weren't mine, but felt familiar. Names, places, confessions I had never heard. I imagined the church beyond the walls of the confessional, hollow and echoing with every hidden thought of every person who had ever knelt here. And now I was inside it, a vessel of whispers. The voice paused. The air was heavy. Still, I wanted to run. I wanted to leave. But I couldn't. Something moved behind the lattice. Or maybe it was nothing. The thought made my skin crawl. I felt my hair stand on end, a chill rising from my spine to the base of my skull. It spoke again. Names, dates, sins I didn't understand. But every word felt like fingernails dragging across my chest. Every syllable pressing a weight I couldn't lift. I tasted iron on my tongue, cold sweat on my skin. The shadows crept closer. The darkness leaned in. I tried to speak. My voice cracked. The booth seemed to swallow it. You will hear everything, it said. And when you leave, the world will seem lighter, but only because you carried inside. I realized I had been holding my breath. I let it go, a hollow exhale, trembling, broken, and then silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty. It hums. It waits. It knows what you've done, even when you don't. I opened the door. The church had gone quiet. The fog pressed against the windows like eyes. The pews were still, but I felt it follow me, a weight in my chest, a whisper behind my rib cage. I walked away slowly. Every step echoed, hollow and precise, and in the distance, the wind carried a faint, reedy sound. My name, calling, and I knew, even as I disappeared into the mist, that I would never be alone again. The chapel smelled of cold stone and old incense. Outside, the wind pressed against the doors. Inside, darkness pooled in corners, swallowing the rows of empty pews. I stepped forward, careful of the echo beneath my shoes. A single candle flickered weakly in the far corner. I reached for a prayer candle, feeling the wax between my fingers. The match snapped. The flame leapt, yellow and warm for a heartbeat. Then it shifted, blue, cold, unnatural blue. It didn't flicker. It didn't waver. The wax remained whole. No heat brushed my skin. Only a quiet, unwavering hum seemed to grow in the silence. I backed away, not wanting to disturb it. But the next candle beside it flared to life. Blue, the one after that, and the next. Soon the whole rack glowed, pale and steady. The hum filled the chapel, soft but heavy, vibrating through stone and bone. I froze. Somewhere, a pew creaked under weight that wasn't mine. A shadow moved, but no one stepped forward. The blue light reflected off the polished floor, splitting into shapes I didn't recognize. I could feel a presence, silent, patient, watching from between the columns, between the pews. The air tasted metallic, like rain on stone. My fingers tingled, my breath shallow. I could hear the faint rustling of robes, or maybe my own heartbeat, echoing against the walls that I wanted to look away. But my eyes traced the figures, pale shapes in the pews. Not empty, not silent, not still that I walked further. Each step measured against the chill. The blue flames followed me with their gaze, though they burned no hotter than the coldest winter night. Every flicker, every reflection seemed deliberate, watching. A whisper of movement brushed past my shoulder. No sound, only the feeling of air shifting, as if someone had exhaled behind me. I dared not turn. The chapel had expanded somehow, stretched beyond the doors I had entered through. Shadows pooled in impossible corners, folding over each other. And still, the candles burned. The figures remained seated, yet I knew they were awake. A presence that didn't breathe, didn't shift, just waited that I sank to a pew, the cold stone pressing into my knees. The light touched my hands, pale and steady. I felt both drawn to it and repelled, as though it belonged to another world entirely. Time stretched. Seconds felt like hours. I didn't move, but I sensed every flicker of the blue flames as though they were pulses in the chapel's heart. Then, slowly the hum softened. The figures seemed to recede, melting into the corners without sound. The candles remained, unmoving, endless. I finally drew a shaky breath. The air was still, heavy with something I could not name. The blue fire burned on, unmoved, untouchable. And I realized, as I stood to leave, that the chapel had always been awake, waiting for someone to notice. The doors groaned as I stepped outside. The wind hit my face, cold and real. I looked back once. Inside, the blue flames were still burning. Quietly, patiently. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just left. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and old carpet. Late afternoon sunlight slipped through the blinds in thin, golden slats. I was alone, stacking storybooks on the shelves, when my hand brushed something cold. A cupboard, tucked into a corner, creaked open. Inside, a neat stack of papers lay yellowed and fragile. Children's drawings. I flipped the top one over. A tall man stood in the doorway. He wore a black robe. His smile was too wide, too patient. His hands, too many fingers. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. It had to be a child's imagination, a trick of proportion. But the more I looked, the more it felt deliberate. The next drawing was dated decades ago. Different paper, different pencil strokes. The same man, same black robe, same crooked smile, same hands. I set the pile down, uneasy. Rustling paper echoed through the quiet classroom. The walls seemed closer, the light dimmer. Every drawing after that was the same. Different years, different children, the same figure standing just beyond the classroom door. All smiling, all with too many fingers. I laughed again nervously. It was silly. Old drawings, old fears. And yet I felt watched. The air had grown heavier, thick with something I couldn't name. Later, I sat at my desk, brushing stray hairs from my face. A small hand tapped my shoulder. I turned to see a child holding a crumpled sheet of paper. "I drew him," she said softly. My stomach twisted. The paper unfolded in my hands. There he was, the same man, the same smile, the same black robe. And this time, he stood right behind my chair. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. The light shifted. A shadow lingered, tall and patient, behind me. The child didn't move. She didn't blink. Her eyes were calm, almost proud. I wanted to ask her how, why, but my voice refused to form. I turned slowly, expecting nothing. The classroom was empty. The desk was empty. The air was still. I looked back at the drawing. The man's smile seemed sharper now. The fingers longer, reaching. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, soft but insistent. A paper quivered on the shelf. I swore it moved toward me. I swore I heard a faint hum, low, slow, like a chant of some forgotten name. I sat very still, waiting for the heartbeat in the walls to stop. It didn't. I touched the stack of old drawings again. Every one identical, every one smiling, every one with hands that no child could draw by accident. The classroom was quiet, too quiet. Even the sunlight seemed pale thin, as if it didn't want to linger here. I tried to leave, but my chair scraped the floor with a sharp, lonely sound. The drawings slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the ground. The figure stared, smiled, fingers spread wide, too wide. I backed away. Footsteps too soft belonged to me echoed behind me. I stopped. Nothing moved. The child's voice was in the corner, whispering, "He's always here." I blinked. The room was empty again, but the papers whispered against each other, rustling, Shuffling, waiting. I didn't touch the drawings again. I left the cupboard open, the stack exposed. Every Sunday since, I glance at the doorway before the children arrive. And sometimes, when the room is quiet, I see a shadow in the corner of my eye, tall, smiling, waiting, and I count the fingers. Too many. The churchyard was quiet. The moon hung pale, almost hesitant, above the slate roofs. A thin fog curled between the headstones, brushing against my ankles. I found the ledger tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the vestry, leather-bound, fraying at the edges, smelling faintly of earth and candle smoke. The ink inside was neat, careful, mundane. At first, the entries were small, almost trivial. Flower pots overturned. Wind, shovel missing, found by the oak. I read each line with a scholar's curiosity, ignoring the faint shiver at my spine. Then the ledger changed. Lanterns moved, not by wind, not by me. Soft scratching behind the chapel wall. Tried to ignore. The words blurred slightly, as if the pen hesitated before committing to paper. I could almost hear the scratching, or thought I could. There was a smell I hadn't noticed before. Rotting leaves, damp soil, and something faintly coppery, like old coins buried too long. I closed the ledger for a moment, listening. Nothing, but the shadows in the yard were wrong. Longer than they should be, stretching east when the moon should cast west. I blinked. The fog shifted. The headstone seemed to lean, ever so slightly, toward the church doors. I returned to the ledger. The entries grew faster, more urgent. Figures in the mist, watching, silent, tools stacked, then scattered again. They are careful, precise, patient. The ink wobbled on the line, almost trembling. My fingers lingered on the words. A pulse ran through the paper. Or maybe through me. I couldn't tell. The final entry made my chest tighten. They are no longer in their plots. I see them sitting in the church, listening to a sermon only they can hear. I will join them tonight. I looked up. The church was empty. The pews were pale in the moonlight, wood polished smooth, too silent. Outside, the wind had dropped entirely. Even the fog seemed frozen, suspended between the stones. I stood near the window. The cemetery spread beneath me, silver and gray, and then I saw it. The headstones. They all cast shadows. Wrong shadows. Twisting, stretching, reaching toward the church in ways the moon could not explain. A hush fell across the yard, like the world was holding its breath. I pressed my palm to the cold glass. Soft footsteps, though no one moved. A scrape against the gravel path. I turned, hard in my throat, to see the fog ripple. Something, or many things, gliding just beyond vision. The scent of the ledger lingered, stronger now. Earth, smoke, something like iron and old perfume. Someone or something had walked these paths for centuries. And tonight I understood. The church doors were still closed. But inside, in the pale hush, I imagined them. Silent figures, cloaked in shadow, kneeling, swaying ever so slightly, as if listening to a sermon that only they could hear. Their faces were pale and featureless, yet I felt their eyes, always on me. A sudden rustle behind the altar. I spun. Nothing. Only the fog pressing against the stained glass, colored patterns wobbling. A hum, low and distant, vibrating in the floorboard beneath my feet. The ledger lay open on the desk. Ink smeared slightly, though I had touched nothing. And I could swear. The words shifted when I looked away. I backed toward the window again. The shadows beyond the panes had lengthened further, curling like fingers. The headstones leaned closer still. And then movement, so faint I questioned it. Figures rising slowly from the ground. Not graves opening, no, but something older, something patient. I couldn't breathe. The ledger called to me, whispering, a voice almost human. They were waiting, the church waiting. I could hear them, soft and distant, murmuring sermons only the dead could hear, and I felt the pull, a gentle tug at my chest, like water slipping beneath skin. The moonlight flickered, shadows dancing across my face. The fog drifted closer, curling over my ankles. The air smelled of iron, rain, and that faint, impossible perfume. I pressed my hand again to the window. Outside, the headstone shadows stretched, reaching, whispering. And inside, I could feel the soft echo of footsteps, ever so deliberate, moving toward me. I wanted to look away, to close the ledger, to step back, but the page beneath my fingers throbbed, pulsed like a heartbeat. And the last line, it lingered in my mind, refusing to leave. I will join them tonight. The night pressed closer. The churchyard waited, silent and patient. The figures inside the mist waited, listening to a sermon only they could hear. And I, frozen, trembling, felt the slow, inevitable pull toward them. The moonlight shivered, the fog whispered, and the shadows, finally, fully began to move. The church stood silent beneath the fog. Stone walls, cold and damp, pressed close around me. The moon carved pale lines across the worn pews, stretching shadows long and thin. I moved without sound, though the floor seemed to breathe under my weight. Every step carried the scent of old wood, candle wax, and something faintly iron like rust. The reliquary waited ahead, gleaming behind its glass like it had been expecting me. I stopped. The case was open. No lock, no struggle, just a gold relic, untouched, sitting as if it had been waiting. My fingers brushed the surface, cold glass biting the skin, and the metal beneath hummed faintly. A single chime rolled through the church, deep, resonant, hollow, but the bells outside hadn't moved. No wind stirred the tower. I froze. The sound lingered, curling around the arches, filling the empty space. I wanted to drop the relic, to run, but my hands gripped it tighter. The chime followed me, soft at first, like a whisper brushing against the eardrum. I took a step toward the door, then another, and it grew louder. Every heartbeat became a drum, syncing with the note, pulling inside me. The shadows seemed to pulse, stretching along the walls and floor. I turned to leave, only to see the flicker of candlelight moving without flame, dancing along the corners. Rustling air, though the windows were closed. A breath, close behind though I was alone. The hum was no longer outside. It was inside. It throbbed beneath my skull, low and insistent, matching my pulse. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it only grew, a vibration through the teeth, the bones, the hollow where my mind should have been. I ran. Stone walls blurred. Feet slipped across the slick floor, but the note stayed. Always there, always louder. The street outside was empty. Fog curled around the lanterns, soft and choking. I leaned against the wall, gasping, my hands trembling on a relic. The hum didn't waver. It wasn't coming from the church. It wasn't coming from the world. It was coming from me. I thought to throw it down, leave it behind, abandon the weight pressing into my chest. But my fingers wouldn't open. The gold was a part of me now, a seed of sound growing, echoing, swallowing the quiet. I pressed my forehead against the cold brick, breathing shallow, tasting the metal tang on my lips. The hum throbbed in the veins of my temples, rising and falling like a tide I could never escape. I closed my eyes. The note followed, always there, always mine. Even as the world slept, I could hear it, even as the fog swallowed the street. Even as silence tried to gather itself, the hum pulsed, soft at first, then sharper, deeper. A single note that would not stop. A church, a relic, a sound that had waited. For me, and now I carry it. Inside me, forever. The church was empty. A pale morning light filtered through the stained glass, muted, fragile. Dust floated in the air, silent and thick. I stepped closer to the font of holy water. The stone beneath my fingers was cold, damp with shadow. I dipped a fingertip in, expecting the soft drip. Instead, a hollow echo answered. A footstep, far away but unmistakable. It rang across the cavernous hall, bouncing off arches, over pews I couldn't see. My heart slowed, or maybe it stopped. I tried again. Another finger, another touch. The footstep returned. Closer, each thud wet and soft, like bare skin against old stone. I swallowed. The air smelled faintly of incense and old rain, heavy in the stillness. My skin pricked, goosebumps rising like a warning. A third time. I barely touched the water. A single drop slid down my wrist, colder than the stone beneath me, and then it landed on my neck. Ice biting, sudden. I froze. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. The footsteps didn't pause. They pressed closer. Heavy, slow, wet, directly behind me. I wanted to turn, to see, but my body refused. A silence wrapped around the sound, dense and suffocating. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. They walked away then, bare dripping, each step dragging softly, wet on stone, into the dark nave. I could hear them vanish into the gloom, a faint splash fading into silence. The holy water trembled in the font. I stared at it, half afraid it might move again on its own. The echo remained in my ears, a shadow I couldn't touch. I left my fingers wet, trembling. The stone felt warmer now, as if it soaked up my fear. Light shivered across the pews. I didn't walk forward. I didn't look back. I just stayed in the pale glow, waiting for the echo to return. A soft drip fell from the font. Slow, deliberate, or maybe it was my pulse. I didn't dare move. The air smelled faintly of wet stone and incense, and I could still feel the cold drop on my neck. I wanted it gone, but the echo remained. I turned when I had to. The nave was empty. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Yet the water still whispered, and in its whisper I could hear footsteps. The air smelled of wet earth. The churchyard glistened under a thin, silver rain. I walked slowly, rake in hand, listening to the rustle of leaves underfoot. Each stone had a name. Each name had a story I could almost hear, whispered through the fog. I spoke softly, as if the dead might answer. "Good morning, Thomas." A pause. "Be gentle with the roses today, Margaret." They never answered aloud. But sometimes when I tilted my ear just so, I could feel them listening. The ground hummed beneath my boots, soft, steady, patient. It has been this way for years. I tend the paths, the flowers, the weeds. The stones stay clean. The grass never strays too far. And in return, they never step outside. I keep my side of the pact. The walls of the church are my boundary. Their silence is the cost of obedience. The storm came suddenly. First a wind, sharp as metal. Then the sky split open in darkness and rain. I sheltered under the porch, hands gripping the wood until it bit into my palms. A crash like falling mountains shattered the quiet. I ran, heart hammering. The old oak, the one at the far edge, split in two and toppled to the roof. Shingles splintered. Beams groaned. The church drank the storm in, and I could only stand in the wet mud and watch. When it was over, the rain softened the drizzle. The smell of wet would fill the air. The church was broken, jagged, naked to the sky. I did not sleep that night. I stood on the porch, hands wrapped around each other, watching. A pale light spilled from the shattered windows, fractured and flickering, and then I saw them, faces pressed against the broken glass, eyes too still, too empty, pale as moonlight, watching. I froze. The wind whispered through the gaps in the roof. A memory of the pact, soft, careful, almost gone, trembled in my mind. I had kept my promise for decades. They had kept theirs. But no longer. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It moved slow, like water seeping through stone. I wanted to look away, to close my eyes. But I could not. They were silent, but their watching carried weight. The weight of all the years, of all the graves, of the one agreement that had held the walls safe. I stepped back. The porch groaned beneath my boots. The rain ran down my neck. I could smell the wood rot. The earth smelled alive and terrible at once. I thought of the roses I had tended that morning, their petals soft under my fingers, their thorns sharp, deliberate. Even they seemed to shiver under the storm's memory. A faint sound, barely a rustle, whispered from inside the broken church. The wind carried it, or maybe it was theirs. I could not tell. I did not move. I stayed there until dawn, until the gray light seeped across the yard and softened the shapes of the fallen oak. I counted the stones, all in their place, all silent, but I knew the pact had ended, and I would live with their gaze, pale and waiting for the rest of my days. The rain stopped. The clouds drifted thin. The church stood jagged against the sky. I turned back to the path, rake in hand. The earth was wet, and the world smelled of loss. And I whispered, because it was all I could do, "Good morning, my friends." The church doors were heavy. They groaned as I pushed them open. Inside, the air smelled of damp stone and old wood. My footsteps echoed, sharp, then swallowed by shadow. I set up my equipment on the altar. The microphone glinted under pale light, catching dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts. I wanted the silence. Perfect, untouched silence. The first recording began. Nothing, just a faint hum of the air, my own breath trembling in the cavernous space. I thought that was all there was. Later, alone in my studio, I played it back. At first, it was nothing, just the emptiness I had captured, smooth and flat. Then I heard it, a whispering swell, impossible, subtle, like lips moving without breath. I leaned closer. It was a choir. No sound, just movement, mouths opening in a frozen scream. I enhanced the track. The silence deepened around me as I listened. The shapes of sound began to sharpen. A single word emerged, brittle and trembling. My name. Again and again. A loop of ice against the skin. I froze. It wasn't a voice I had known. It was something else. I played the recording against the grain. Slow, slower. The faces of the choir pressed through the noise. Pale shapes, eyes hollow, mouths frozen mid-cry. And one of them, closer now, leaned toward the microphone, looking at me, looking through me. I could feel the silence pushing back. It pressed against my ears, my throat, my chest. My fingers hovered over the playback, unable to stop it. The word, my name, clawed its way into every corner. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the technology, a reflection of my own fear. But the image on the screen moved differently than the sound. The choir members' eyes were too real, too deliberate. I returned to the church the next day. The doors groaned as I entered. The air was heavier now, the silence thicker, almost alive. I walked to the altar, set the microphone in place, and waited. The emptiness responded, a rustling from the shadows, soft as breath. I froze. No one should be here. No one could be here. Then a shift, tiny, almost imperceptible. A figure in the back, pale under the filtered light, mouth open, eyes fixed on me. I wanted to run, but my feet were led. The microphone hummed softly, as if acknowledging her presence. Her gaze followed every movement I made. The silence was no longer silence. Back at the studio, I watched the footage again. The choir remained, still impossible, and the word, my name, replayed endlessly. I realized I could never erase it. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the choir, their mouths moving in a silent scream, and one of them always looking directly at me. Alone, I understand. Some silences are not empty. They wait, they watch, and they remember your name. The forest had grown quiet. The sun hung low, a pale smear through the fog. Leaves whispered under my boots, though I was certain I'd passed this trail before. I stumbled on something smooth beneath the fallen needles. A stone path, perfectly laid, each slab clean, edged with statues. They were saints, I thought, faces long worn away by wind and rain. Blank, yet accusing. I kept my gaze low. The path wound forward, narrowing, pulling me in. The air smelled damp, a sweetness I couldn't place. My breath came shallow. Every step echoed softly, swallowed by the fog. The chapel appeared like a memory. Small, white, untouched. No moss on the walls outside, no cracks, no soot. Just stillness. The door creaked as I pushed it. Inside, the air was heavier than the forest, stiller. It smelled of wet stone and cold wood. Light from high windows made everything pale, almost unreal. Every surface was covered. Pews, the altar, the floor, thick, velvety moss. I reached down. It was soft, too soft, like skin. My fingers sank into it, and a shiver ran up my arm. I could feel my own pulse in the velvet, as though it remembered me. I stepped back. A draft, or the door swinging shut behind me. The latch clicked. I didn't move. The moss shifted, subtle at first. A faint greenish glow pulsed beneath my touch. It matched my heartbeat. Faster, panic rising, slower. I tried to slow it. The statues outside seemed to press against the windows, their blank faces leaning in, silent, waiting. I tried to breathe, to count, to calm myself. But the light throbbed, brushing against my chest like a hand. The velvet whispered as I passed, stretching toward my shoes. I tried to step back, but my feet clung. Every sound became a rhythm. The tap of my heel against stone, the hum of the forest outside, the pulsing moss, a harmony I couldn't unhear. I touched the altar. It quivered beneath my palm. Not the stone beneath, the moss itself. It seemed alive, as if it had waited centuries for warmth, for flesh. The chapel felt smaller. Air thickened. My eyes traced the windows, the pews, the statues. Nothing moved except the moss. Slow, soft pulses, creeping along every surface, every shadow. I tried the door. Locked. Panic pressed against my ribs. The moss glimmered again, pulsing faster now, a heartbeat racing with mine. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to run. But my hands refused. The green light filled my vision. I saw shapes in it. Figures bending toward me, waiting in the velvet. I closed my eyes. It didn't stop. I opened them. The moss seemed to inhale, then exhale, and I realized it had been breathing all along. I wasn't the first to walk this path, and I would not be the last. I sank to the floor, fingers brushing the velvet, feeling every pulse. The chapel was endless now, stretching in the corners of my eyes. Time didn't move, and yet my heart did. The light slowed, dimmed, a whisper of air. The statues leaned back. The chapel softened around me. I breathed. I felt alone, and still I could feel it beneath my hands. Waiting. I stood. One step, then another. The moss receded slightly, yielding as it displeased. I left the path behind. The forest took me again. But the pulse, it stayed with me. The church sits on the edge of town, swallowed by fog. Its windows are black, its doors nailed tight decades ago. I step carefully across cracked stones. The air smells faintly of wet wood and rust. Each breath feels thick, heavy, like the clouds are pressing down. A crow drifts past, quiet, its wings brushing the cold air. Inside, the floorboards groan under my weight. Dust rises in tiny clouds. I can almost see the shape of lives that once filled this place. I found the diary on a splintered pew. Its leather is cracked, its pages brittle. The priest's handwriting curls across the paper, neat but uneasy. Something new, he writes. They come at midnight. They never speak. They never sing. I can almost hear the silence between his words. I trace the letters with my finger. The wood beneath feels cold, alive somehow. There's a hum here, soft, almost breathing. He writes about their shadows. They do not match their forms. I close my eyes and imagine shapes moving without bodies. The thought leaves a tremor down my spine. The diary's final page trembles in my hands. They have asked me to give a final sermon. They say it is for the world. I have run out of wine, so I must use something else. I read it twice. The words taste metallic in my mouth, like iron in wet soil. Something in the air thickens, like it knows. I move toward the confessional. The boards are loose, rotting at the edges. A scratching begins, soft, tentative, under the wood. I crouch. The sound stops, then starts again, dragging, deliberate, patient. My chest tightens. My fingertips itch with cold. I can feel the priest there. Or maybe something older. It leans close, so close I can almost smell the candle wax, the dust, the decay of centuries. The altar is empty. The faint outline of shapes lingers on the walls, wavering like smoke. I can't tell if it's shadow or something else. I turn the page in the diary again. Each word seems heavier now, weighted with expectation. I hear faint footsteps behind me, soft, pacing, never landing. The church exhales with me, slow, hollow. I imagine him there, giving that final sermon. No wine, no voice, no words, only offering. I step back from the confessional. The The scratching has stopped, but the silence feels thicker, pressing against my ears. A gust moves through the broken window. Dust swirls, and for a moment, the air tastes of old ink and cold iron. I swallow. I can't see them, but I feel the congregation. Still, watching, waiting. The diary drops from my hands. The church exhales again. And then, nothing. The morning fog pressed against the stone walls of the church. I could smell the damp plaster, faint and bitter, under the rising sun. My boots echoed softly on the cold floor, like distant footsteps following me. The mural waited. Or it felt like it was waiting. The saint was still there yesterday, sword raised, pale robes folding in the painted wind. But the shadow, it had already begun to stretch. Each day I returned, it grew, not slowly, not in hours, but in a way that made the air heavier. I'd step back, brush in hand, and its form would lean toward me, longer than before. Its edges sharpened, black like smoke, moving almost like it breathed. I tried to focus on the saint. I retouched the halo, softened the folds of the robe, added light to the blade. But the shadow leaned harder, its fingers curling toward the saint, curling toward me. Sometimes I imagined it was whispering, not words, exactly, more like promises or warnings or questions I didn't want to answer. At night, I dreamt of walls closing in, of paint running like blood, the saint screaming silently, the shadow taller than the steeple, holding my face in its dark hand. This morning, the church smelled sharper. Wet stone, old incense, fear. I opened the heavy door. The hinges moaned, and I stopped. The saint was gone. Where his figure had been, scratched, torn, vanished. The plaster was bare, smooth, pale, mocking, and the shadow, it filled the wall. It wasn't generic anymore. Not smoke, not simple darkness. It was me. I could see my hands, long and thin, my shoulders, the curve of my neck, the edges of my face pressed on the wall, sharper than mirrors. Even the brush I held yesterday. It was there, suspended in the shadow's hand. I stepped closer. The cold plaster kissed my fingertips. The shadow didn't move. Not exactly, but the hairs on my arms rose. The air vibrated. It leaned toward me, bending the light, bending me. I remembered each day I had painted, each layer of color, each stroke that was supposed to banish it. And now it had consumed everything I made. Even me. I wanted to leave. But the floor felt softer under my boots, like walking on mist. The walls seemed to pulse gently, rhythmically. And the shadow, it breathed quietly where the saint should have been. I whispered my own name. It whispered back. Not my voice exactly. A deeper one. Older. A voice that sounded like the weight of hours I had spent staring at it, alone, with nothing but paint and stone. I wanted to turn away, to run from the church, from the shadow, from myself. But the shadow leaned, almost casually, almost patiently, and I realized it had been waiting for this day. My reflection was everywhere, on the wall, in the wet plaster, in the brushstrokes that no longer belonged to me. I touched the mural again. The plaster was cold. My fingers sank slightly, and I saw it, a smile mine curling in the darkness. The sun shifted. A pale light stretched across the stone floor. The shadow receded slightly at the edges, but it didn't leave. It stayed, watching, waiting, breathing. I stepped back. The air trembled, and I understood that the saint had never stood a chance. Only the shadow remained. And now I did too. The doorway sheltered me from the wind. A city street breathed around me, damp and hollow. I slept where shadows pooled, the church looming above, silent and still. In the morning, I left a leaf on the step, a dry, curled thing, brewed between my fingers. It was all I could give, nothing more than a token of thanks. By the next dawn, the leaf had vanished. In its place, a loaf of bread sat warm, steam rising faintly in the pale light. I pressed my palm to it. It smelled of wheat, of warmth, of care I had never known. I didn't understand. I only felt the hunger in my chest ease. And something whispered in the quiet, soft as dust settling. Keep giving, and you will receive. So I left a leaf each night. The wind rattled the eaves. Fog clung to the cobblestones. And each morning a loaf awaited me. warm. Oh, more than I had dared imagine. The world outside felt distant, brittle, gray. The church seemed to breathe around me, its doors closed but welcoming. I touched the cold stone, and it pulsed faintly beneath my fingers. One night, hunger sharpened its claws. My palms were empty, my pockets lighter than air. I saw the silver collection plate, gleaming under the candlelight, and I took it. The night was still when I left, my footsteps swallowed by the hollow streets. The wind whispered differently now, soft, but something in it was not welcome. I awoke to silence. No loaf, no warmth. The plate gone, and the church door stood open. The darkness inside was deep, inviting, almost alive. The air smelled of earth, of smoke, of something old. I could feel it calling, patient and exacting. I had understood. Too late. A price must be paid. The streets were empty. My breath fogged. Small clouds that dissolved in the morning chill. I stepped forward, drawn by something I could not name. Inside, the shadows moved with a kind of patience. The candles flickered, though no one was there to light them. The walls hummed quietly, a low, persistent rhythm that pressed against my chest. Every footstep echoed, as though the floor remembered each one before mine. I thought of the leaves, dry, brittle, honest. I thought of the loaves, warm, full, patient miracles. And now, nothing was free. The silver had vanished into the darkness. The offering had been stolen from the balance. The price had risen. A shadow brushed past, soft against my arm. I flinched, but it did not strike. It only waited. The pews stretched endlessly, each one empty but heavy. The air smelled faintly of yeast and rust, of wood and something older, something patient. I could hear my heart beat, and behind it, a whisper, faint but clear, "Everything has a cost." I knelt on the cold stone, my hands empty, my mind quiet. The dark seemed to settle around me. It was neither cruel nor kind. It simply was. I left a leaf on the step the next night, and waited. The doorway sheltered me again, but the city felt different. The wind carried a warning now, soft as breath. And I understood, finally, the rhythm of giving, the balance of the unseen, the quiet, inevitable price of miracles. I never touched the silver again, but the darkness still watched. It waits, always patient. The fog lay thick over the churchyard. Branches scraped against cold stone walls. I had arrived just as the last lantern flickered out. Inside, the air smelled of oiled wood and candle smoke. Pale light pooled around the clockwork saint, its brass limbs clicking in time with the hour. Each movement precise, deliberate, a ritual I had watched for hours. At first, it was mechanical, unthinking. But around midnight, I noticed the fingers bending too smoothly, almost human. The head tilted with curiosity, a tilt no gear should allow. I pressed my hand to the pew, the wood sticky with dust and wax. Every hour, the saint's blessing sounded like a chorus of grinding gears. Each motion sent faint vibrations up to the floor, a rhythm in the silence. By 2 a.m., the church seemed alive. The shadows stretched and recoiled with every sweep of the saint's gaze. I could hear the soft hum of springs unwinding, a slow, deliberate heartbeat beneath the wood. I told myself it was imagination. The faint rustle of my coat seemed louder than the saint's own breathing. The eyes, glass and brass, now held a strange, reflective gleam. 3 a.m. approached. The clock struck, but the saint did not bow. It stepped down from its plinth with a whispering metallic creak. The floorboards moaned under its weight, soft, deliberate, alive. It turned toward me. I froze. The carved wooden lips twisted into a smile that did not belong to wood. A voice emerged, low and grinding, layered with gears and whispered prayers. "The mechanism is winding down," it said. I could feel the vibration of its words in my chest. A new heart is required. The air grew thick. I smelled oil and iron, the faint tang of old blood. Its hands hovered near my chest, hesitant, calculating. I tried to breathe, but the silence had weight. The only sound was a clockwork saint's slow rotation, a pendulum swinging toward me. Each second stretched into eternity. The candles flickered. Shadows danced across the walls in unnatural patterns. I felt the wood beneath its feet pulse as though alive. I wanted to run, but the doors had vanished. Only the faint click of gears, like soft footsteps in the distance. Its eyes, hollow yet piercing, measured me, weighed me. The smile widened. "Will you give it willingly?" the voice asked, almost tender. I couldn't respond. The words clawed inside me, mechanical yet intimate, pressing against my chest. The saint leaned closer. I could see the faint glint of metal beneath the carved surface, veins of clockwork threading through its limbs. The smell of oil became overwhelming, filling my nostrils, my lungs, my mind. I shut my eyes. A pause. Then a faint, almost human exhale brushed my ear. When I dared to look, the saint was back on its plinth, motionless, polished, silent. The candles burned low, shadows retreating to the corners, but the air still hummed. I could feel it in my veins, the rhythm of gears winding down. A promise, or a threat, I could not tell. I stayed until dawn. The fog lifted. Birds called. The church appeared ordinary once more. Yet, when I passed the plinth, I swore the saint's eyes followed. And in the quiet, I heard again a soft whisper beneath the hum of the morning. The mechanism is winding down. A new heart is required. I left without looking back. But the sound of gears, it follows. The monastery is quiet, almost too quiet. Stone walls swallow every footstep. The moon drifts across the cold floors, pale and hesitant. I arrived days ago, carrying a notebook and a pen. The others barely glanced at me. Their faces are pale, blank, framed in the flicker of candlelight. Silence hangs heavier than air. No voices, no laughter, not even the scrape of robes. Only the scratching of pens. Each cell is a small, cold room. I watch the monks at night. They don't sleep. They stand, faces pressed to the wall, hands clasped, breath so steady, it almost hums against the stone. I wrote a note to myself today, testing the rules. Why do you never sleep? No answer came. Not a nod, not a scratch, only stillness. Earlier, I found a note tucked beneath my door. The ink was dark, jagged, deliberate. It read, "Do not make a sound. It listens in the silence." I held it too long. The words clung to my skin. I felt a cold shift behind my eyes. Last night, my pen slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor with a clatter, sharp and unforgiving. The echo roared like a gunshot in a canyon. I froze. The silence that followed was not the silence I had known. It was aware, hungry. It seemed to lean closer, bending toward my cell. I pressed my palms to walls, but they were solid, unyielding. Still, the attention lingered. I tried to write. The pen shook, my hand still mid-stroke. Even the candle's flame trembled. A shadow flickered across the far wall. I thought it was mine, but it lingered longer than it should have. Too slow, too deliberate. I tried to breathe without sound. The air felt thick, almost viscous. Every inhale carried weight, and I feared it might betray me. In the corridors, the monks remained statues. I passed one this morning. His eyes, though still, seemed to follow the air itself. I wondered if the walls whispered to him. I cannot remember the last time I felt alone. Alone would be a comfort now. Instead, I feel watched, always, even as I scrawl notes, hoping for some safety in words. Sometimes I hear a faint rustle, a soft footstep that shouldn't exist. It curls around the edges of my awareness. The pen hovers over the paper, trembling. I dare not speak. The note warned me, and I can feel that warning in the marrow of my bones. Even now, in the dim dawn, the silence sits at my door. It waits, listening. It knows when I shift, when I blink too loud. It is patient, infinite. I cannot tell if it is the walls, the monks, or something else. Something older than these stones. It waits in the quiet, in the gaps between breaths. Tonight, I will try to sleep again. Not lying down, but standing, as they do, facing the wall, hands clasped, eyes wide, yet empty. Perhaps the silence will forgive me. Or perhaps it will remember the pen's clatter. And then it will come. I am learning the rules. Silence is not absence. Silence is attention. And it is waiting. The church was warm. Candles flickered along the walls. Outside, snow pressed softly against the stained glass. I followed my family down the aisle. Voices rose in song, bright and high. The smell of pine and baked bread lingered in the air. Then I noticed it. A single pew at the very back. Empty, cold, waiting. I slipped away, feet brushing against the wooden floor. A shiver crawled up my arms. Sitting down, the world changed. Joyful voices grew distant. The carols sounded muffled, like underwater echoes. A fog seemed to seep between the pews. I pressed my palms against the bench. It felt icy, as if it would have trapped winter inside. My breath rose in clouds, misting in the pale light. I watched my family up front. They looked smaller somehow, their forms hazy, almost unreachable. A rustle beside me. I froze. A woman sat down. Her dress was black and old-fashioned, soft and heavy. It smelled faintly of damp soil. Her hair hung like shadows. Her eyes were pale in the candlelight. She leaned close. A finger pressed to her lips. Cold, pale, fragile. She smiled. The air seemed to hold its breath. Even the flickering candles slowed. Unsure. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The pew felt like it had swallowed me whole. Every heartbeat echoed in the silence. My cheeks stung from the cold that seeped through my coat. I could hear the distant choir, muffled and strange. Their songs vibrated faintly against my chest. She didn't speak, only watched, and smiled. The warmth of the church had disappeared entirely. It was just me, the frost, and her quiet presence. I felt the floor beneath my shoes become damp. The scent of roses drifted toward me. Old roses, faded, earthy, a garden buried long ago. The spell lingered. Seconds stretched into long minutes. I tried to remember my family's faces, but they were distant shapes, moving in a dream. I couldn't reach them. A whisper of my name. Soft, familiar. Emily? I turned. My mother's voice cut through the haze. Bright, warm, alive. The cold pew released me. The woman was gone. No rustle, no shadow, no scent. Yet the air still carried a chill, and the faint, lingering smell of roses and damp soil. I rubbed my hands together. The pew no longer felt empty. It had remembered something, something that lingered. I joined my family again. The music swelled vibrant and full. I tried to smile, but the memory of her smile stayed with me. Soft, pale, silent, even when the candles burned low, even when the church emptied, even when snow fell quietly outside. I could still feel the cold, still see the mist of my own breath, still smell those old roses. And I knew that pew would wait for me, always. The farmhouse smelled of damp wood and dust. Outside, the autumn wind scraped against the windows. The sky was pale, as if it had forgotten color. We moved boxes and old pews, our footsteps echoing in the hollow rooms. The walls whispered of years we could not remember. I thought I heard soft laughter in the far hallway, but it was only the wind, or so I told myself. In the basement, the air was heavier, colder, a faint smell of earth and something older, like wet stone and forgotten prayers, clung to everything. I shone my flashlight across the floorboards. There it was, the baptismal font, stone worn dark. A shallow pool of water caught the dim light and swallowed it. I leaned closer. The water did not ripple. It did not reflect. It only waited. My fingers brushed the edge. Cold, impossible cold. It was as if the stone itself exhaled frost. I tried to shine my light directly into the water. It vanished, devoured by a black, so deep it seemed alive. A soft hum rose from somewhere beneath it, or perhaps from inside me. I pulled my hand back. That night, the farmhouse groaned with quiet movements. I slept fitfully, dreaming of shadows gathering in the corners of our rooms. Then I woke. A faint rustling drew me down the stairs. I thought I heard her voice calling my name, but no sound came. She was at the basement door, pale, silent, her hair loosed around her shoulders. Her feet slid across the floor, bare, unnoticed by her. I froze. She knelt by the font. Her hand dipped into the black water. Ripples moved, but against no motion I could see. I stepped closer. "Are you awake?" I whispered. No answer. Her head lifted slowly, eyes wide, horrified. Something is holding my hand down there, she breathed. The words trembled like fragile glass. Her arm did not move, not fully. Something beneath the surface clung to her. I reached for her. The water licked her wrist with icy fingers. A pulse ran through me, low and steady, like the beating of a distant drum in stone. The basement seemed to contract around us. Shadows pulled at the corners, twisting toward the font. I tried to pull her free. Her lips quivered. Her eyes searched mine, pleading. The air thickened with the smell of wet stone and decay. A silence heavier than night itself pressed against my chest. I could feel her heartbeat in my own ears. Finally, she fell back. Her hand slipped free. The water stilled again. The blackness remained. Quiet, waiting. We sat on the cold floor for a long time. Her hands shook in mine. The hum faded, leaving only the dripping of water, somewhere deep, deep beneath the stone. I couldn't look into the font again. The basement held its breath. The farmhouse settled around us, as if it had never moved. And yet, I knew it would watch. I left a candle burning by the stairs. Its pale light quivered across the walls. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows. And below us, the water waited. The church sat at the edge of the lane, its stone walls pale in the late afternoon light. Fog curled low across the fields. I stepped inside, boots soft against the worn flagstones. The air smelled of wax and old wood, a faint hint of smoke lingering from candles long extinguished. A visitor's log lay on the table near the door. Its pages were neat, orderly. I picked up the pen. Curiosity weighed heavier than the silence. Every page bore the same name. Eleanor Gray. Page after page. Month after month. Year after year. Her signature repeated, unchanged, patient. A devotion I could barely imagine. The vicar appeared quietly, his footsteps lighter than my own. She's our most devoted parishioner, he said softly. Attends every service without fail. I nodded, pen hovering over paper. Something about the repetition pressed against my chest. I asked about her. The vicar smiled faintly. You can wait after evensong. You might see her. Evening came slow. The church filled with shadows stretching long along the stone walls. The candles flickered. Soft hum of the organ drifted through the aisles. I stayed seated, watching, listening. Minutes stretched. The doors creaked. No one came. The pews remained empty, save for me and the ghosts of names written in ink. An old woman appeared by the doorway. Her hair was silver, thin as mist. I am Eleanor Gray, she said, her voice fragile as a hum of wind through the belfry. I froze. Didn't you attend services? I whispered. Her gaze fell to the floor. I broke my hip over 2 years ago. Her hands trembled, pressed against her lap. No one has seen me here since. The air thickened around me. I could hear my breath, slow and shallow, soft rustling from the folds of her dress. A faint scent of lavender lingered, and then faded like a memory. I turned back toward the empty church. The logbook lay open on the table. Fresh ink glistened in the pale candlelight. Eleanor Gray. The signature was new, wet impossible. The curve of the letters exact, unbroken. I reached toward the page. A chill ran along my arms. The church felt smaller, walls pressing closer, silence wrapping tight around me. I could hear something shifting. The faintest shuffle behind the pulpit. I looked again at the old woman. She sat there, fragile and real, yet the ink on the page betrayed reason. She had not come for years, she said, and yet here she was, or something of her, leaving her mark still. The candles guttered. Shadows stretched into corners I hadn't noticed before. Soft footsteps brushed the stone behind me. Not my own. I couldn't move. I only stared at the page and the repetition of her devotion, the quiet persistence of a name. It felt patient, endless. A cold draft slid along the aisle. It carried the faint sound of a cough, then a silence so deep it pressed against my ears. The logbook remained open. Eleanor Gray, Eleanor Gray, a devotion beyond reason, beyond the limits of the body. I left the church slowly, the fog clinging to my coat, the sound of my boots muffled by wet grass. Behind me, The windows glowed faintly, and inside, the signature lay waiting, still wet, still hers. The lane was empty. I walked on, but the name followed, soft as a whisper, etched into the quiet of my mind. The fog hung low over the city that morning. It curled between the buildings like smoke, pale and slow. I could feel it cling to my coat, cold and damp. The church loomed ahead, brutalist, jagged, impossible. I hadn't stepped inside for 50 years. He moved slowly, Kane tapping the stone floor. His hands shook, not with age, I realized, but with memory. The air was thick with dust and silence. "I didn't build it for God," he whispered, voice rough, almost lost in the hollow echoes. I stopped. The sound of my own breath filled the empty hall. The walls seemed to lean in. Sharp edges cut shadows along the floor. Every corner, every step, was a note in a low, vibrating hum. He gestured toward the center of the church. A black marble wall. Perfect, featureless, endless. "That is the lock," he said. His finger hovered above the stone. "I built it to hold something I found here long ago." I wanted to ask what. The words froze in my throat. The chill of the marble seeped through the soles of my shoes. The ceilings were high, unreachable. Light slipped in through narrow cracks, brushing the dust in golden lines. But even light felt restrained, like it feared to linger. He walked along the walls, cane tapping lightly, each echo a pulse in the emptiness. "The angles, the chambers, every corridor is a cage," he murmured. I could hear his voice bouncing, folding into itself. It sounded smaller somehow, trapped. I crouched to touch the marble. Cold, unyielding. A smell of wet stone, old and sharp, rose under my fingers. He paused, staring at the center. "I never meant this to be opened," he said again. A long silence fell. Even the fog outside seemed to wait. Then it happened. A hairline crack, almost invisible, spread from the center of the wall. It was slow at first, a whisper of movement, a sigh through stone. Then impossibly it widened, faint light bleeding through the blackness. My stomach tightened. The air shifted, heavier now, smelling faintly of smoke and iron. I wanted to step back, but my feet refused. He watched calm, almost sad, not fear, regret. It radiated from him like heat from a dying fire. "The cage is weakening," he said. I didn't need to ask what it held. I could feel it in the way the walls shivered, in the subtle vibration under my hands. The echo of a soft footstep, my own, followed the crack. But it wasn't mine. A shadow moved, stretched, and flickered across the floor, just beyond sight. He leaned closer to the marble, voice low, almost to himself. I tried to contain it. The stone groaned softly, like the building itself was inhaling. A draft whispered through the hall. It carried a faint metallic tang, like rain on iron. The shadow stretched higher, brushing the sharp edges of the ceiling. It paused, motionless, aware. I wanted to look away, but the crack called me. I felt the hum through my chest, low and insistent. It was alive, watching, waiting. He touched the wall with both hands. Wrinkled skin pressed to perfect black. "I thought I could bear it," he said, eyes closing. "And maybe you will have to." The crack split a little more, revealing a sliver of impossible darkness. It had no shape, no edges, just depth, a void that breathed silently in the middle of the marble. I could hear the faintest scraping, like nails on stone, far inside. The hair on my arms lifted. Even the fog outside seemed to pause at the threshold. He turned to me then, eyes pale, almost white in the shifting light. The design, every misstep, every corner, it was all to keep it contained. Not for beauty, not for praise. Only this. The crack quivered. A shadow wavered within it, like something waiting to be remembered. And for a moment, I understood why he had returned, to bear the regret, to see what he had built one last time before the silence broke. I did not speak. I could not. The fog, the marble, the shadow, all of it pressed close, whispering in voices older than stone, and the church seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the lock to fail. The wind has been drumming all day. Snow presses against the windows in hard, cold sheets. The world outside is gone, swallowed by white. We found the church by accident. A low, stone building, doors cracked open. Inside, the air is dry, smelling of old wood and dust. The altar is bare, save for 7 candles. We light them slowly, one by one. Their flames tremble, pale, small warmth in the chill. I count them aloud, softly. 1, 2, 3. Their glow shivers over our faces, over the pews, over the stone floor. Time is strange here. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, the world holds its breath. I feel the rhythm of the storm in my chest, in my hands. Hours pass like this. Quiet, heavy, broken only by the occasional creak of timber. And then the first candle dies. No wind moves. No one touches it. Just gone. We glance at each other. A shrug, a breath, a nod. Perhaps it is just wax or flame. Yet the empty stub looks deliberate. A small, accusing absence in the middle of warmth. Another hour. The second candle goes. I notice a cold that isn't from the snow. It slithers along my spine. I hear it in the pause between heartbeats. 3, 4. The rhythm of extinguishing candles becomes a pulse. We are counting less to mark hours than to mark ourselves. Each lost flame leaves a hollow, a tiny shadow behind our eyes. I try to speak. Words catch in my throat. The church swells with silence that smells like old stone and fear. Even the fire seems hesitant now, watching us. We glance around. Faces pale in flickering light. 7 of us. 7 bodies, bundled in coats, shaking. 7 breaths. But something shifts. A shadow at the edge of candlelight. Not in the pews, not behind the pillars, but just beyond the reach of warmth. Just there, always there. I feel it when the 6th candle dies. A presence, cold and patient, waiting. I do not want to see it. But my eyes catch movement in the corner, and I cannot look away. 7 candles left, then 6, then 5. We huddle together. No one speaks. The firelight seems thinner with every loss. The 7th candle dies. A hush swallows the room. I look at the last one. Its flame burns differently. Stark white. Too bright. Too clean. It hums softly, as though aware. And then I see it point 8 figures. 8 shadows moving just beyond the glow. We are 7. The 8th does not breathe. Does not move. Not really. It waits that I can't step forward. My feet are stone. My voice is snow. It leans slightly. Just enough to blur into the darkness. Eyes that are not eyes. Or maybe eyes that should not be seen. Watching the final candle. Time bends. The flame flickers, almost pleading. I imagine it shrinking, begging to be allowed to rest. I hear my own heartbeat inside it. The 8th figure leans closer. I feel the air thicken, taste the ash on my tongue. The candle burns hotter now, yet colder than anything I've known. I want to light another. I want to run. I want to pretend it isn't here. But the candle is alone now, and the 8th is patient. It waits for the flame to die. I close my eyes. A gust of air, no, still nothing. Only the faint hum of wax and waiting. I breathe in, and it tastes of snow, of frost, of stone. I exhale, and the flame flutters, white as bone. The room tilts slightly. I feel myself shrinking. The others, they do too. We are small against this waiting. I open my eyes. The candle is trembling. I see it in the reflection on the floor, in the shadows of the pews. The 8th figure stands still, patient, certain. The flame shivers once, and then it is gone. The church exhales. The cold presses inward. Darkness presses outward. I feel the 8th among us, though we are 7, and it does not move. We sit in the hollow light of memory and fear. No wind, no sound, no snow. Just us and the 8th, and the hollow absence of what was once warmth. I close my eyes again. The shadows fold around us. I feel the frost crawling in, sliding along our bones. I do not move. I cannot move. And yet I know the 8th waits, always waits, until someone or something finally counts to 8. The house smelled of old wood and winter air. I hadn't expected to return here. Not really, but the letter arrived anyway. My grandmother's handwriting, curling at the edges, urging me home. The key waited on the kitchen table. Iron, heavy, Cold, almost biting my palm. A small note curled with it. Do not let the door close behind you. I left the house behind. Footsteps muted on frost-cracked stones. The ruins of St. Ignatius rose through the fog like a memory I couldn't place. The wind whispered through broken arches, and yet there was a hum beneath it. A low, steady vibration that pulled at my chest. The door to the church was taller than I remembered. Paint flaked from its frame, and moss curled along the edges. I touched the key to the lock, and it felt like ice in my hand. A shiver ran up my arm, though the air was still. Inside, light spilled across the floor. Not sunlight, not any sun I had ever known. It was pale golden, filtered through the dust and shadows, settling softly on every surface. The pews gleamed, and the aisle was endless. Figures sat in silence, not people. Shadows shaped like people, waiting. Their faces were empty, yet I felt eyes everywhere, watching, patient. The hum inside rose, pressing against my ears, curling into my bones. The door swung, slowly, almost reluctantly, back into place. A whisper wind from nowhere, and the church seemed smaller, tighter. I could feel the cold key, heavy and demanding, pulsing in my palm. I wanted to leave, but the note lingered in my mind. Do not let the door close behind you. And the shadows, they waited. The choice hung in the air. Lock it from the inside and join the waiting. Lock it from the out and leave. But leave what behind? I stepped toward the door, hesitant, hand shaking. The hum rose to a soft chant. I could feel it in my teeth, in my stomach, in the soles of my feet. The shadows leaned forward. A congregation frozen, patient as stone, silent as snow. I turned the key. The iron scraped against old metal, echoing like a heartbeat. The door shivered on its hinges. A breath passed across my neck, and I froze. The light shifted. Colors I couldn't name shimmered along the walls, flickering in time with the hum. A faint rustle of movement. The shadows stirred, subtly, like leaves in water. I moved closer. The decision pressed like fog against my chest. I could lock it from inside, stay with them, join the silence, or lock it from outside, leave the hum behind, the light behind, and the waiting shadows still waiting. The key felt colder now. It was heavier than memory, heavier than choice. I slid it into the lock, and the sound of metal biting into metal resonated through the church. The door moved, slow, deliberate. I stepped back. The congregation leaned a fraction closer. I felt the air thicken, soft footsteps that were not mine brushing across the floor. The hum became a heartbeat, steady and eternal. The key fell from my hand. It hit the floor with a sound I couldn't name, echoing through the hollow, golden light. The shadows bent just slightly toward it. I did not reach for it again. Outside, the ruins waited cold and silent under the fading sky. Inside, the church breathed, alive and untouched by ruin. And I understood, finally, the role my grandmother had left me. Not keeper of a building, keeper of the waiting, keeper of the light that was not sun, keeper of the shadows that never slept. The door swung shut, and I did not move.